Is there a chance you're saying that we could actually run out of soybeans?
I don't want to raise alarms here, but the USDA is consistently marking down throughout this year as we export hand over fist more than ever before to China. You know, China's already cleaned out Brazil from last year. They're down to 38 metric million tons of soybeans, and they are hoovering up food from anywhere in the world right now. And the US, sadly, is just letting that happen. We're just sending them all of our food.
Welcome, everyone, to this Peak Prosperity Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Martinson, of course. And today we're going to be discussing, a wide range of things. We're going to be discussing climate, grand solar minimum, maybe the Great Reset, certainly COVID, what's been going on there, and lots of things around food and the possibility of food shortages with Christian of Ice Age Farmer. Christian, welcome so much to the program. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Chris. You do great work, and I'm honored to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So let's start here. Your website is iceagefarmer.com. I want to make sure people go there. You've got a ton of different places that you can send people to. I want to talk about that in just a second. But first, is there a chance you're saying that we could actually run out of soybeans?
There is, and it's not just me. I make sure to find agricultural experts because I'm not one, and I want to see what they're saying. And it is alarming, to say the least, to see them using the same sorts of words that I would. Like, I don't want to raise alarms here, but the USDA is consistently marking down throughout this year as we export hand over fist more than ever before to China. You know, China's already cleaned out Brazil from last year. They're down to 38 metric million tons of soybeans, and they are hoovering up food from anywhere in the world right now. And the US, sadly, is just letting that happen. We're just sending them all of our food. And so actually the USDA in November had a report that said, whoa, we were kind of off here, guys. About half of our corn and half of our soybeans aren't there. And then in the report that they released yesterday, December 10th, they cut those ending stocks and production numbers down even further. So yes, there is absolutely a shortage that's materializing. And of course, traders, being traders, will start to speculate, and that will sort of amplify the whole situation. Now, a lot of people will chime in at this point and say, you know, this has happened in the past, although not at this level, but usually what happens is price rationing kicks in, meaning the beans this is supply and demand, right? The beans will get expensive. China will stop buying because it ceases to make economic sense. Now we have to come back to the grand solar minimum factor and the reality that China knows very well what's going on. And that's why they are sucking up as much food as they can from out the world. So I do not expect that price rationing mechanism to work. And not only that, the markets, you know, they actually, prices fell yesterday, even as ending stocks were marked down further, which is it's not functioning. The market is not functioning as it should, which amplifies the reality that price rationing is not going to work at this point. So yeah, I think we're in a situation where we do need to look at the fact that soybeans are, by and large, the number one source of protein for animal feeds around the world, that this corresponds exactly with the stated goals of these technocrats and their desire to end animal agriculture. That's a direct quote from a number of them, including the CEO of Impossible Foods, who's creating lab-grown meat funded by Bill Gates. I mean, these are agendas, and they are executing rapidly on them. And a collapse in soybean stocks will mean that the cost of animal feed rapidly rises until it becomes so cost prohibitive to feed your animals that a lot of producers will be forced to start culling their herds. And that is, you know, you can't just invent more cows and plant more cows the next season. This is a lasting damage to the protein and the meat supply of the world right now that we're about to experience. We've already experienced some of this just in the name of the pandemic shutting down the meat plants earlier in the year. So there's already been some initial turbulence here, and if and as this soybean shortage materializes and has those impacts on animal feed, you know, it's a huge blow. Soybeans are, of course, used throughout human food as well. If you know, because you're trying to keep phytoestrogens away from your kids and keep them healthy, when you walk to the grocery store, it's nearly impossible not to find products that have some form of protein isolate or soy lecithin or, you know, some soybean oil, which is also labeled as vegetable oil. So when you walk around the supermarket, it's really, you know, breads have vegetable oil in them, not like the artisanal sourdoughs. You'll still be able to find some of this thing, but we're talking about, of course, the soy milk. So a lot of people, when I made this report on soybean shortage initially, they said, finally, we'll get rid of the soy boys. It's not that simple. You know, we're talking about bread. We're talking about meats that ship in oils. There's a long list of any of those products that have soy in them, and I think we're at risk again as the price of soybeans rises. It will become prohibitively expensive for these manufacturers to get their products to market. Another objection that one might raise at this point is, well, that's we'll just find some economic substitute. We'll go out and get a different oil and put that in the bread. We'll use something else. And while I very much hope that this is the case, unfortunately, again, Chris, I think we've seen in 2020, in the early days of the pandemic, when some restaurants and schools shut down, we saw how brittle and inflexible our food supply chain is, as dairy farmers were forced to dump by the truckload milk down the drain because they couldn't, again, this is the point, they couldn't pivot and find some other distribution channel that quickly. So given what we've seen this year, I worry that it's unrealistic to expect that large-scale manufacturing, these big bread bakeries and these kinds of uses of soybean oil will have difficulty, to say the least, in quickly pivoting to something else. I think that's unrealistic.
Yeah, the quick pivoting, COVID taught me a lot. And one of them was about that milk situation. I didn't understand. So, everybody's like, oh my God, people panic bought toilet paper and that's why we ran out. It's like, no. What happened was people were staying home, so they were taking 40% more dumps at home. And that means they need toilet paper at home. And it turns out there's two parallel, but never shall they talk to each other, distribution and manufacturing supply chains, one for the retail and one for the commercial markets. And it turns out you can't just sort of divert into the other because there are these giant rolls that go into the airport, bathrooms, and people weren't using those. So the Charmin got rinsed. And it was simple capacity manufacturing. And the same thing happened in milk. I learned that there's all this milk that was supposed to go in these big giant things, totes that ends up at Starbucks in the lever machines or whatever they're doing. And there were only so many 1 gallon milk jugs, and people were now drinking milk at home instead of just on Saturday, Sunday. They were drinking it 7 days a week, and it just, again, collapsed that side of the supply chain. So I learned a lot about supply chains and all of this, and discovered that it's just the old thing: time, quality, cost. What do you want in business? These are very cost-effective systems, but they're not very resilient. They're tuned for a specific operating environment. As long as people are going to work Monday to Friday and coming home Saturday, Sunday, it's tuned for that. Very efficient cost-wise, but it couldn't manage the change. So you're talking about some larger changes. Like what happens to this larger supply chain network of the feedstocks going into the animals, the animal supply chain, the soy, all the stuff that, like, if you run out of soybeans, I mean, I would imagine that would be a fairly substantial, a supply shock again, that would just sort of, there'd be some learnings in there, I bet.
Some learnings, to say the least. I mentioned certainly animal feed is the big one that comes to mind for me and goes directly to their stated goal of ending animal agriculture. But like I said, the vegetable oil is a big one. The soybean oil that's used in fried and baked goods, lots of breads, salad dressings, meats like tuna fish that come in oils. Soy lecithin is used not just in chocolate, but a lot of breakfast cereals, breakfast bars. Soy protein isolate means all those protein bars and protein powders aren't going to be there. Yes, we will get rid of soy milk, which oddly may mean that there's a good chunk of our population that, like I said, is eating all of this food that is inundated with soy. And there's a chance that they actually literally go through a kind of a mass menopause, a withdrawal from the phytoestrogens that they've been imbibing on a daily basis. It's kind of a weird thing to imagine Antifa getting even more riled up from that. So yeah, it's throughout the human food system as well. And, this is not even speaking to biodiesel and other industrial uses like paints and plastics and cleaners that have some aspects of soybeans in them. What's left at that point on our shelves is pasta and, canned goods and frozen goods. And this is where we have to start sort of broaden our scope a little bit, because everything I just named is we've seen reports due to this second wave of COVID-19, there's going to be shortages of canned goods and shortages of pastas. And then on the frozen goods front, the World Economic Forum just volunteered the other day that the new super spreader is frozen food packaging. And so this is another case, Chris, where I worry that rather than take appropriate steps to ensure the population stays fed, they're going to further amplify the effects. They want to collapse even what should have remained on the shelves if soybeans run short. And all of this, of course, would again be to make the case, right? They need that problem, which is the first step of the Hegelian dialectic. They need a problem so that they can justify the reaction and the solution. And in this case, when we're talking about taking over the food supply chain. And this is it's a stated goal that Rockefeller's rolled out there, reset the table agenda. The EU called it the new farm to fork policy. The UN is running their food systems summit, all about insect proteins and how we need to reformat, fundamentally change the entire food system and what we eat to save the climate and in the name of public health. But to actually get people eating bugs, they're going to need to poke people. They're going to need people to see why the way we've been doing things can't work. And so these are, in from where I sit, these are engineered food shortages that from their perspective, pave the way for that complete reformatting of the food system.
I'm kind of two minds here. So here, I said I had a framing for the Great Reset, and I've been analyzing it. And when I strip away the gobbledygook and the transhuman techno fantasy stuff, which I don't agree with at all, I agree with the larger thing, which is, hey, we're at 7.8 billion. We're going to go to 9 billion. We knew we were kind of screwed up. They didn't put it in this language. I'm paraphrasing. We didn't really come up with a plan B, and we don't have the resources for all these billions of people who basically want to live into middle-class lifestyles. It doesn't exist. We don't have the oil. We don't have the soil. We don't have the water. We don't have the cement. We ran out of sand. There's all sorts of like flashing red lights from a Malthusian, but it's just sort of a limits-based discussion, which says, hey, there's a limit to this sphere we live on, and we're kind of poking up against it. And I get the impetus to say maybe we should have a plan. I'm more of a out front, be honest with it. People can handle the truth if you tell them. They take a different approach. That's fine. But I understand that where they're going with this and all of that. I don't agree with how, but I agree with the why behind it, which is sooner or later we're going to have to face up to this idea that we can't keep living the lives we've been living. Sake of argument, United States still consumes about 25% of the world's energy, and we're 6% of the population. But that dynamic is rapidly shifting, and it doesn't work. There's just not enough energy for 100% of the world to consume the same amount we do. It doesn't exist. So the question is, what do you do with that? And so a lot of that's my framing for this. It makes it, we do need some sort of a response to that. That's what I think the Great Reset really is the elites kind of looking around and going, this was unsustainable, which I agree with. And we got to do something, which I agree with. And then, of course, they're control freaks. So it's all about like making sure that everybody gets a barcode and a chip and has a digital currency. And anyway, that's sort of their view of how this works. I'm not sure I agree. But against all of that, let me get your reaction to that, because I have a response to what I think people should consider doing, given all that. But what do you think about that framing?
Well, I agree with a large part of what you said, except that I think you give them a lot of benefits about a lot of doubts when you say that there's any altruistic motivations behind this at all. I think the control is the bottom line here. And I think that's evidenced by the simple reality that a rational response to what's going on, to the problem, the very real problems that you just enumerated, would not be taking total control of all food into massive indoor insect farms, or saying we should all be eating plant-based proteins, which are actually even more unsustainable, even worse for the environment, to do tons and tons of soybeans and monocropping, right? They want us to fail forward into even more tighter control, because that, I would argue, is their goal. And if it were not, then we would see more reasonable and potentially successful solutions like diversifying our food supply, decentralizing it, and empowering everyone to be able to go back to, victory gardens, where the way we used to think about this, everyone should be growing their own food. That way there cannot be a blow to our food system that takes us all out. That's the way humanity has survived to date. And so I think to think about anything else is just really, it's got to be motivated by the wrong kinds of ideas here. And that being, as you hinted at, just taking total control of things. And they're pretty open about that being the motivation when they talk about the new supply chain being a blockchain and artificial intelligence driven system that will identify uniquely every last coffee bean harvested and every piece of a fish pulled from the sea, so that we can track it across the entire planet. They're implementing that system. IBM is rolling out that system right now because of the COVID-19 scare. And, they're putting in these surveillance systems that, Klaus Schwab himself writes in this book. The COVID-19 is not as huge as a thing as everyone might think it is. But the reality is that these surveillance systems will not go away after. These are lasting changes that they're engineering to humanity right now. And they've put satellites in the sky. It's another way that the agenda has been grafted onto climate. It's not contact tracing now, it's climate tracing. And we actually saw Al Gore himself come out with a climate tracing initiative whereby a network of existing satellites is now being married into this new artificial intelligence system that watches in real time emissions across the world so that they can identify anyone who's breaking the rules and has too many cow farts on their property or is growing the wrong, whatever it is you're doing, any industrial activity that is unauthorized by the technocrats will now be seen in real time from above. And at the same time, they're deploying biobots into the sewers, again, in the name of looking for, just so we can detect early outbreaks of viruses. But the reality is that they can use that information. It's a very rich data set, human sewage. And so they're able to see dietary trends and drug uses, as well as the spread of viruses and things like that. So surveilled from above, surveilled from below, complete awareness of every resource on the planet. All of this has been described for some time under the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. This is, I would love to give them the benefit of the doubt, like you are maybe doing here, or maybe you're just playing devil's advocate quite literally, but I just don't see it. Yeah.
Quite literally. My honest view is that I think that I really believe in the word Kayanaskatsi, which is the Hopi vision of the white people saying you're just out of balance. So I think we're living a life that's out of balance, right? And part of that is we've gone down this role of breaking things down and thinking we can reduce them and reduce and reduce. It's sort of the masculine traits. There used to be, if you went to old Greek times or any other times, there would be goddesses and gods. It was this balance. And we went down this road of saying, hey, we're just going to see if we can reduce everything and understand it. What I love all the quantum physicists. They've gone through that hole of singularity and popped out the other side and said, oh my God, the Sufi masters are right. It's all kind of energy and vibration. Anyway, there's this weird mashing up of stuff. But I feel like this great reset is one last great push to see if we can't just control everything. But I'm sitting on 180 acres now, and I want to get to this next part, which is about the soil. I'm all about the soil now, and I have this humility to know that the soil is more complicated than anything we could possibly understand, right? In its interactions, in the immense integrity and mathematical computational power of nature and what it's derived is beyond our ken. But these people think that if we could just get one more layer of control, and it's kind of like they're the people who go, all those problems we just created with technology, we're going to solve them, right? And they don't have any awareness that we've been on that loop forever, and it's never gone anywhere but required one last giant, even more complicated technological thing to be done. I think they'll fail. So that's why I want to talk with you, and that's why I want to talk about this all this stuff. And they may fail for reasons that are out they don't even see, like Dalton and Maunder minimums. They may not see peak oil coming. Who knows what they don't see? But they think they can control us, and they think they can control everything, and therein lies the salvation. I disagree completely on that front, because I'm a big believer that complex systems have emergent behaviors, and all you can do is watch them happen, and you can't predict them, no matter how good your AI is, right? So I'm a big believer that it's like, okay, well, maybe we can use technology a little bit better, but in the meantime, I think you ought to know where your food's coming from. And I mean where it's coming from, like nice and local. And I'm taking some of that on my own right out that window out there. So what are your thoughts on that?
That's awesome. Congratulations on the purchase of your farm, by the way. Yeah, absolutely. I do also believe, I share your belief that ultimately they will fail, that humanity, I just don't think, I think the more you squeeze the human spirit, the more we will flourish and fight back about. And I think we're seeing that right now. And I'm incredibly encouraged by all of the people that are, so to speak, waking up to these agendas and starting to fight back. People that you wouldn't have expected to be receptive to this information a few years ago are now, oh my gosh, are you seeing what they're doing? So I think we're sensing the beginnings of that mass awakening and of the response to this. And yeah, it's just like saying, well, we need more government to solve the problems of government. You're right. We need more technology to solve. So yeah, those things are destined to fail. And Chris, it can be a quite painful failure. There can be a lot of people that are caught in that collapse of the massive global technocratic seize for control that they're attempting right now. So while I remain optimistic, and I have to, I don't know, that's just the way I am. I firmly believe in humanity and our ability to weather these storms, but they can still be very dangerous storms. And that's why, like you said, yeah, we need to be growing our own food. We need to be doing taking prudent steps at this point. Yeah.
So let's talk about the anti-fragile approach to all this then, because this is actually what I think. So I've been at this a long time, and 2020 is the year where I got to tell you. So one thing I hate is when people decide they've had enough of the conversation. They say, "Oh, that's conspiracy theory." Right? Somehow that's like calling someone a child molester or a whatever. It's just you're of the wrong religion. It's just a showstopper. I'm just like, okay. 2020 has been the year where all these so-called theories have become facts. And they're just, and I know people are having their own adjustment reactions, their own emotional ability to sort of wrestle with the fact that this is actually happening, and here it is, and that there are these agendas and plans and things like that. And given that, though, I really think people need to have a response to that besides paralysis or dread or fear, because that's actually part of their narrative. The other narrative is, well, what can you do about that? And I believe in this idea of decentralized stuff. Reagan said about the Soviets, trust but verify. I'm like, I'm going to hope for the best, but I'm going to make plans as if that stuff doesn't work out. So, what are your plans that you're making, and what kind of things should people be talking about? I tell everybody to plant a garden. That's like number one. People are like, what should I do? I'm like, plant a garden. All sorts of reasons for that, not least of which is it's going to take you some time to learn how to do that, and you can't shorten the cycle because it just takes time. So anyway, solutions. What's the response to all this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. We can hope, but hope is not a plan. And so the only rational response to these people who say, like Henry Kissinger said, if you control food, you control people, and their attempts to centralize the production of and the control over food, the only rational response we can have is to all start growing, is to all plant those victory gardens. And you've done some great interviews already with Marjorie Wildcraft and Joel Salatin just last week about these sorts of things. And I've done a lot of that on my channel as well. I think one of the things that actually is very encouraging is that I had a conversation with Marjorie Wildcraft, and she's got her 3-part system: the rabbits, the eggs from chickens, and then the garden. But I've also had conversations with indigenous, a Hopi dry farmer who has completely different ways that he's able to be totally self-sufficient. I've talked to Gabe Brown, who's a holistic rancher in North Dakota, where he runs a farm and grows crops and raises animals without any external inputs whatsoever. And actually, by virtue of the regenerative practices, the holistic animal husbandry that he's doing there, these things, and there's a lot of overlap. When we talk about permaculture or indigenous practices, a lot of these things are all pretty much describing the same way, at least the same ways of thinking about running your home. And that's a lot about the soil, like you've already sort of hinted at there. But just by virtue of using these practices instead of the brittle at-scale monocropping, you actually become much more resilient to the changes in the climate that we're talking about, the changing growing seasons. And so a lot of the solutions are just in returning, rather than failing forward into the technocratic control, returning to the things that have been working for humanity since the dawn of time. So yeah, huge amount of focus should be on the soil. And, I like to reference it's very easy to remember the 5 basic principles of soil husbandry, of caring about your soil, is keeping it covered, because there's as you hinted at, there's a really rich microbiome in the soil that if you take care of it, it almost can't help but just grow amazing plants for you and feed your family. It's a great relationship you develop there. And that's why a lot of these indigenous cultures had spirituality. It's almost impossible. When I spoke with a Hopi dry farmer, it was hard for him to talk about growing food without getting into his worldview and his spirituality, because it's just you're in communion with forces bigger than yourself when you do these things. So the 5 soil principles, though, are keep your soil covered, keep an armor on the ground at all times so that the microbiome isn't exposed to the conditions of the weather and the sun. Don't disturb the soil. Tilling it, kills off this rich microbiome that we're trying to take care of here. So don't disturb it. Keep it covered. Keep a living root in the soil at all times, even if it's in the winter. Just some cover crop means that every day when the sun comes out, that plant is working constantly to take the energy of the sun and feed it out through the exudates from the roots into the soil. And so as long as you have a living plant in your soil, you're constantly building up and feeding this microbiome that we're taking care of. Maximizing biodiversity is the 4th one. And that just means, the more different kinds of plants that you have, the more different kinds of energies and exudates that they're feeding into the soil. And obviously the more resilient, if there's a frost that kills one off, the other will still be able to there feeding the soil. So this all speaks to just being able to keep that soil alive no matter what. And then the fifth one, and this is the big one, integrating animals into your homestead, because there's just no substitute for the very rich manure. That's a very important part of the nutrient cycle on a working homestead or a farm, whatever it is. At any scale, you have to close the loop of feeding the plants to the animals, and then they feed the plants, and it's just the same. And you can describe the same sort of a nutrient loop even when you talk about some soilless practices like aquaponics. I hear a lot. In fact, it makes sense. A lot of people don't have big farms or even backyards that they can grow in. If they're in apartments, then that's when the answer starts to be look at aquaponics, which again has the animals being the fish that take the fish food you're feeding them, and then their pee goes on to feed the plants in their system. And so there's just this, it seems like magic, Chris, to have these plants just growing by virtue of the fact that there are fish down below that you're feeding, and this closed loop system keeps producing food for your family. And so even without the soil necessarily in there, you can sort of, aquaponics is still, it's a very rich system. But point being there that is a very space efficient way of growing foods. And another big one there is rabbits that really don't take, Marjorie talks a lot about this, because you can put rabbits in, a corner of your garage, and still that's, not only is it producing, they breed like rabbits, right? So that not only is it producing protein for your family, but they are yielding very rich manure that you can take out and build a garden basically from scratch, just using their poop on a daily basis. And so integrating animals into your homestead is a really big, that's why I left it for last. It's one of the biggest aspects of these 5 principles of good soil husbandry. And I think that also speaks to why they are so dead set on removing animal agriculture completely, because it means that they break this holy cycle of nutrients and of nature, and thus make you completely dependent on their chemical fertilizers and their food. So that's why ending animal agriculture is such a big deal to them. But those are the 5 principles of soil management that I think are a great place to start. And you can do that on any scale. If it's just like little planters on your balcony to your front yard, it's really key.
Touchy subject in our culture, but there's one place in the world which they've actually had continuous agriculture for over 4,000 years. And it's a region of China. And there they have a caste system running where there's a group of people whose whole job is to bring nutrients back out to the fields, by which I mean they collect the waste, human waste, not waste. It's actually valuable stuff, but they've closed that nutrient loop for 4,000 years. It's the only place I'm aware of that's done that, right? Every other place, when you farm, you tend to strip mine the soil, right? When a kernel of whatever grows, and you're like, wow, it's got magnesium and calcium in it, and it's got protein and all that stuff. Well, that nitrogen didn't just sort of magically appear in your protein, and the calcium, magnesium are minerals. They have to be replaced. So we don't have that nutrient looping thing going on in our agriculture. It's a strip mining operation, but here on our farm, we've owned it for a year, but we brought 4 cows in to help resurrect a field. And 2 of them are going to go through the winter with us, and we're mob cropping them. And I came across Gabe Brown's work, and I'm like, oh, I need to find out who he's using for his cover crop, and called the company, and we're working with them to get it's just tiny. We only have like 8 open acres to work with, but a field. But they really opened my eyes. The deep complexity of, we're coming up with a 12 seed mixture, and there's the sorghum with the deep roots for this and the legumes for that. It's really complex. But when I watched Gabe Brown stuff, I'm like, here's a guy doing it at scale, 3,000 acres, I think he's running, right? Mm-hmm. And he's doing it, no inputs, and he's just crushing it. And still people don't do it. His neighbor, I think he's got a famous slide of his neighbor's like compacted, like non-draining field right next to his. He's like, yeah, it's been like that for 20 years. He keeps looking over at our stuff going, what are you doing? But he won't do it. So there's a lot in this story that has to change. And I think the impetus for that is 2020 has been a good year for that. Because a lot of people all of a sudden woke up and said, this whole system feels a little fragile. I live in a world now where I could be told I'm not allowed to go anywhere. So my whole basic freedom set, including the freedom to assemble, to move, to conduct business, could all be taken away. But that could even extend to food at some point. So growing your own makes a lot of sense. And for people who think it's as simple as you just put seeds in the ground, it's way more complicated. And to become a soil farmer, is going to be the rest of my life. I'm going to try and become okay at it. It's a really worthy challenge, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels, like I said, it feels really good. You get the sense that you're working with nature or with a force bigger than yourself when you go out and you see these plants, especially the second season you come out and you got some volunteer plants that I didn't even plant that. And here it is just coming to greet me. It feels so good. And of course, as with any investment, as you're learning right now, it's a ton of work up front. But the idea is that you're investing your energy into a system that at some point will start to pay off, and then it becomes a virtuous cycle. And of course, it pays off more and more yield over the years ahead of you. So you put in these years of hard work at first, both because you're learning what's going on, but also because you're building up. You're starting that virtuous cycle, and it does take some energy investment to do that. And then as you start to feel the traction and get those rewards, it just feels great.
To close this out, I will note for people that you mentioned that China's hoovering up the soybeans, and I'm over here on the energy side noticing that they're hoovering up the available oil in the world. And I did some work with people from China at a fairly high level, and they they get it. As one of them told me, he said, "We don't have any lawyers or community organizers at the top," right? And this was when Obama was president, right? Which was sort of a dig at Obama's past to being community organizer and a lawyer. So they have PhDs, they've got scientists, they've got, like really accomplished people sort of at the top. And this was years ago. This guy was not confused. He's like, nope, the world's running out of stuff. We're trying to figure out how to get enough for our people. We're very worried about it. And they were busy building oil tank farms, underground storage, building up all sorts of capabilities. They wanted to be first in alternative energy manufacturing. Like they have a real plan, but their plan was based on the idea that they could see forward a few decades and go, this is going to get awkward. And so I feel like my country, the United States, has no plan. I don't think we have. If there's a plan, I don't know where it is. I haven't seen it. It seems to be, we'll just do more of this next year.
Yeah. Sadly, we're too busy infighting right now, and I think that is part of the globalist plan, is that we have to crush what remains of America. We have to make them feel the brunt of this engineered food shortage, both to make the case that we have to reset the food system, but also to squash what's left of the free world at this point. There's one other thing I wanted to really emphasize here, and that is the importance of saving seeds. We've seen the seed companies, Monsanto, Syngenta, these guys have gradually taken over everything and eliminated a lot of the genetic diversity, sadly, of everything on Earth. Right there, it's basically ecocide. They've been killing off all of these just incredibly rich, different heirloom varieties of seeds. Something really special happens when you grow your own food and start saving seeds, by virtue of the fact that plants actually learn. They learn about where they've grown, and they pass that knowledge on to their next generation. And so there's a guy named Matt Powers, who's a permaculture teacher, who tells a story about he got a hold of some special corn from South America that could barely get a crop out the first year, but he got just enough corn kernels out to plant them next year. And then that year, they really took off because they had made that initial hard adjustment to a completely different, part of the world, and figured out they were dealing with different conditions and a shorter growing season. But that next crop really gave him a good yield. And you'll see this as you start to grow wherever you are, whether it's cold or dry, whatever it is rocky soil, clay soil, whatever it is that's going on. Those first generations of plants, if you can just get them to get through that first season, are going to give you some seeds that are nice and real and gritty and have learned about where you are. It's called a land race. And so I always want to recommend this book called Seed to Seed, which just tells you about a huge number of plants and how you can grow them to seed and then save that seed. And it's not rocket science. Again, people have been doing this since the dawn of time, but that is a hugely important thing because, again, they're killing off the biodiversity. It's another attempt, a long-standing one now, to take total control over the food supply. And so grow your food, save your seeds. And that also means, one broccoli plant, any of those brassicas, you just when they're gone to seed, you shake them and you've got buckets, literal buckets, or amaranth. It's incredible how prolific. I'll never forget my son saying, "Oh my gosh, it was one plant and now there's thousands of seeds." It just blew his mind to see the abundance that flows from even a single plant. And so once you get your garden started, then yeah, you can be that guy that then has seeds for your whole neighborhood. And not only that, they're seeds that grow in your neck of the woods for your neighbors. And by that same logic, if you're just getting started, you absolutely must find people nearby who've been growing already, because not only do they know the challenges you'll be facing, the predators, right? The weird, it's gonna, maybe sometimes it frosts in May, whatever it is, your story where you're growing, they'll know that story. They've been practicing it. I guarantee they want to share what they've learned because they're proud of their garden. And then to this point, they have seeds that are ready to grow in your neck of the woods. It's not like growing, it's not just ordering seeds from some seed company in Missouri and then having to go through that first sort of awkward season of getting them to acclimate to where you are. So grow, save seeds, look for knowledge and other seeds that's already been saved from your neighbors and your master gardeners in your neck of the woods. These are the keys to kickstarting your food operation where you are. I really wanted to throw that in there.
Oh, great. I'm glad you did. Rang a number of bells. I hadn't thought of that, but I've known for a long time about, my mind got blown when I heard about how memories are able to be encoded and then passed on through like literal memories that mammals have are able to be encoded and passed. And of course, nature's way more complex than we thought. But of course, the plants had that same thing dialed in. I hadn't thought of that though. So thanks for that. That's
yeah,
a really
definitely.
good thought. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So I could keep talking, but I have a time limit that I usually adhere to for these things. So iceagefarmer.com, you've got people can find your YouTube channel there. You have a lot of different places, maybe as a closing thing, a lot of other platforms I see you're on here. Gab, Steemit, DTube, you got a Twitter account there, which is Ice Age Farmer, all one thing. Why so many platforms?
Well, I'm talking about things that I'm confident they don't want us to be talking about at this point. And so I have been trying to get out ahead and use BitChute and LBRY.TV to make sure that that all of the people we're having good conversations with can keep this connection open when YouTube finally goes ahead and pulls that plug. And we've seen even, it's been a rapid advance over this last month. Now they're talking about, if you talk about the vaccine or you talk about the elections, then we're going to pull your YouTube channel. And you just were censored the other day. So I think we're all feeling the heat right now. And that's why I was trying to, again, it's a biodiversity play. It's trying to diversify the channels to get the information out there, because that is the point.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with somebody today. They said, "Oh my God, you finally pushed the envelope too far and you got censored." I said, "No, I've always been this guy." They've started encroaching on my sense of integrity and my
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
I haven't changed. I just do what I do, which is I call it like I see it, just like you do. It's like, well, and that's, yeah, as a final point, I'm not afraid of ideas. I don't always have things right. My personal motto is, I don't know what the truth is, but man, I'm good at smelling bullshit, right? But I love the ability to be able to talk with stuff and be challenged and try stuff and accept stuff and reject stuff. I'm okay with that, but there's a growing zeitgeist out there amongst certain people who think that ideas are dangerous. Other people need to be protected from ideas. I don't, of course, but other people do, because they might misinterpret things and do bad things. So it's really paternalistic. It's very much has no trust in the other human out there to say, I don't trust these other people to be exposed to ideas that I find objectionable. I can handle it, but I don't know about them. I'm totally built differently. I trust people to wrestle with things, make mistakes, do goofy things, come to different conclusions, and basically grow wiser as they grow older. But I'm starting to feel like a dinosaur with those views compared to what's happening in my country right now.
Well, I think we're still the majority, right? I think they'd love for you to feel like you're a minority and a waning one and a dinosaur at that. I just saw Melinda Gates earlier today saying, it's really sad about these, the state of the internet and people being able to share whatever information they have. It's really incumbent upon the owners of the technology to make sure that the information that's being shared is accurate. In other words, it's the information we want. So yeah, they're pushing hard on that right now. And you're right, it flows from a fundamental distrust of humanity. That's the key here, is they don't love each other, they don't love themselves. It's a self-hatred driven kind of a thing. We don't trust people to have information. We don't trust them to have firearms. You can see it across the agenda here. And as you've said, and as I firmly believe, I am confident in humanity. I love this species, and I think we will blossom given the admittedly tremendous challenges we're facing right now. This is a point of embarkation for a new kind of consciousness that's rising right now. There's no longer possible, Chris, for us to straddle and sort of just like, well, this is going on, but maybe I'll just sort of hide out over here and maybe weather the storm. No, it's really, it's all in right now. We can't just let the TSA pat us down when it comes to injecting our children with these kinds of crazy things. I think everyone is sensing that right now, and so people are taking the appropriate actions.
Great. I'm so glad you framed it that way, because that's it's actually really important. I actually, from a higher level perspective, nature may, or I think nature's running experiments with consciousness, and we're one of them. And history says, the historical fossil record says, nature tries a lot of different things. They don't all make it, right? So if we want to make it as one of the conscious evolutionary sort of thing, we're going to have to step into that role. We really will. And make no mistake, if we get wiped off the board, octopuses or dolphins or raccoons or elephants or crows, whatever these other things which are clearly conscious, they'll step into that void, and nature will keep iterating and working through that experiment. So I think this is our moment as a species if we're going to step up, right? And what I don't like about the Great Reset crowd is I think they're asking me to go backwards. They're asking me to go into a state of unconsciousness, exist in a state of fear, get squashed, be small, live in your little container, all of that. I actually think the only hope we have if we're going to get through these many predicaments we face is if we step up into our better selves, like full consciousness. We step into love, oneness, humility, all kinds of things, right? True diversity of thought, not fake diversity, which is like, based on something that's veneer thin. There's just like so much that I disagree with the keepers of the message right now, but I feel the tide turning. I'd love to get your impression. I feel it turning. I can feel people waking up. I can feel this movement happening. And I think they are scared of it because it's not about control and, all that stuff. It's going to expose them as basically joyless, loveless, maybe even soulless individuals. I think that scares them a little, as it probably ought to. But I do think this is actually a really big existential moment for our species, not Americans, but for humans, to figure out if we can actually be a successful experiment.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love the way you phrased that. And clearly they're working to engineer the Untermensch, right? They want to devolve us into some weird subspecies that can't think for ourselves. Another way of looking at it would be sort of a Jungian phrasing where collectively, Jung did a lot of work on the shadow and how you, at some point, you come through a dark night of the soul and have to meet your shadow, and you can't really fight it and defeat it because that just empowers it further. You have to become conscious of it and integrate it. And I think one could argue that collectively, the collective conscious is actually, for the first time, seeing the shadow, the shadow government, the shadow cryptocracy. You hear these things, and it all sort of reflects that, that humanity is having that dark night of the soul right now. And again, like you said, I'm fully confident that we can weather the storm and get through it. It is going to be a turbulent storm, and we do need to take care of our families during it. But with full faith that that means there is a brighter future ahead.
Well said. I really agree with all of that. And I came across a Jung quote the other day that I hadn't heard before. I was surprised because I know a lot about him. And he said, people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. And I totally agree with that there's a thing trying to come through into that collective consciousness, and I can feel it. And people like you, myself, there are people out there wrestling with that, because not like any birth, this thing's not coming out just fully formed. It's like got to be wrestled out. But there's something that's trying to come through. Mm-hmm. And I'm really excited to be part of like trying to figure that out, knowing that I'm probably slinging hash at a soiree that won't be over till the last aperitif is done, deep into the night, right? So this is this next 1,000 years is going to be pretty awesome. Sorry, I can't see all of them, but yeah. This is a really big moment, I think, is what's going on here. So it helps to have that framing to sort of say, look at the big things so you can get oriented to what's actually happening and not get bought into their game. Because their game is really about fear and small, and it's distracting, and it's trying to keep us separated from each other. I get it. I understand why they do it that way. It's not how I would approach it, but
right.
Yeah.
And compliance, right? And so, this is the most important conversation that we can all be having right now. And that's why I appreciate, Chris, you're having it and using this channel for that purpose. But it's bigger than that. It's all of us. And you look at experiments like the Ash conformity experiment, where a whole room of people was sort of like tricked into doing weird things. And then it only took one person, one critical thinker, and I'm talking to you, the viewer of this program right now, to say, this is silly. I'm not doing this right now. And then the rest of the room said, no, it is silly. If he's not going to do it, I'm not going to. You can see this when you go into a supermarket and don't wear a mask, and there, you get some scowls, but then you get this one guy who's like, well, wait a minute, if he's not, I'm not going to do this. And he takes it off when he looks at you, so you can experience that. And you just have to be that person right now. Have these conversations. It's no longer weird to talk about, like you said, it's not conspiracy theory anymore. These are no longer weird fringe topics that make you a freak. This is the zeitgeist moving, and it's the most important conversation we can all be having right now. So have it, do it.
Yeah, and it's exciting because instead of saying, I'm going to live into this sort of very thin, narrow, shallow consumer life that I've sort of been bred into, it's say, well, wait a minute, what do I want to do with my life? Who am I going to be? What am I here to do? It becomes existential like that, but it should be, right? Every generation wrestles with this. You go all the way back to the Seneca's time, way back when, and people were always asking, those bigger questions, which is, what is this all about? And now that's what's up for grabs again. And the answer I have is that we are either the participants or observers of whatever comes next. Mm-hmm. And that's fine to be an observer, but I want to be a participant. I want to be in that creator class. I want to be the people who are actually there nudging the story so that it goes this way instead of that way, Yeah.
It would be fine to be an observer if things were going the right way. But at this point, this is just not, you can see what they're doing, and that is not the world that I'm prepared to leave to my sons. So I'm becoming an active participant as wholly as I can. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good. In closing, so where would you send people? IceAgeFarmer.com, of course, your Twitter handle, IceAgeFarmer, same moniker for YouTube, but how can people support you, follow your work, do all that best?
Yeah, IceAgeFarmer.com is the best way to find me. There's a few different ways to support the show at IceAgeFarmer.com/support. And I'd very much love to hear from people, from traders or people that are farmers or people that are in the retail industry and seeing the trends. Anyone is, I love talking to people and would love to hear from you at IceAgeFarmer@protonmail.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Keep doing what you're doing. Let's hope the ban hammer doesn't come down anytime soon, but if it does, we'll know where to find you.
Perfect. Chris, thanks so much.